Lars Hedegaard is co-editor of Dispatch International, president of the International Free Press Society, co-director of the book publisher The Free Speech Library, and author of several books on contemporary history and Islamic affairs. He is also a recipient of the International Civil Liberties Alliance Defender of Freedom Award. I spoke with Mr. Hedegaard in Toronto. Lars, what prompted you to found and be president of the International Free Press Society?
Well, we had some troubles back in Denmark where we started out in 2004. It's a long story, but basically I was denied membership of the PEN organization. As you may know, they claim to defend free speech, and as I could not join, they refused to let me in. So I waited for a few months, and somebody approached me and asked if I would be the founder of a new free speech organization. I hesitated to do that, but eventually I succumbed to outside encouragement and did it. And we founded it at the end of 2004 and had our first meeting in March of 2005 and have been going at it ever since. So we've been in business now for, 8 years plus.
And in that time you've created chapters in other countries as well, Canada being one.
Canada being one, and lately Sweden has been another one. Sweden has been in business, I think, for about half a year.
So what's the underlying reason to have a free press society? Is it a lack of ethics in journalism? That you find that you have to have a society to protect the free press?
Well, that too. But basically, it has to do with the fact that organizations such as PEN are not entirely devoted to free speech. They have various other ideas that they want to put forward, such as tolerance, understanding, brotherly love, eternal peace, etc., etc. I mean, all kinds of things are nice to have, but have nothing to do with free speech. Free speech is not the freedom to speak nicely. It is freedom to say what people don't want to hear. Otherwise, I mean, if free speech consists of saying the things that people want to hear, you don't need free speech.
And to that extent, though, it seems that the speech that needs the most protecting, if I could label it, seems to come from the right. Would that be accurate? Because the left seems to have its own...
At the moment, yes, but that could change. Of course, the left does not realize that they could be in hot water someday. I don't anticipate that would happen soon, but it might happen. So what are they going to do? If all of a sudden you're not allowed to criticize capitalism or the West or anything. I mean, any idea should have the right to be put forward in the public sphere, regardless of whether people like it or not. The state should not be in the business of punishing or prohibiting speech at all, in my estimate.
So it's not just the Fourth Estate or journalism that you're trying to protect the integrity of, it's government action as well?
That too, and also a lot of the attempts to limit or prohibit free speech these days does not come from governments as such. It comes from private actors, such as Islam, or the leaders of the Ummah, that is the Muslim nation. These are really the most dangerous at the moment. When it gets really bad is when they are in cahoots with governments and also with the Fourth Estate, as you mentioned. I mean, then it gets really dangerous because you have the beginning of a dictatorship, and it's very dangerous. And we have to stand up against that.
You've recently been acquitted of charges of, what was it, hate speech?
Hate speech, yes.
In Denmark by the Supreme Court there.
Yes.
Do you wear that as a badge of courage?
Well, that's for others to decide, really. I wear it as a necessary victory for the right to speak, at least in your own home, because that was the issue here.
Could you walk us through what was alleged and the trial and your ultimate acquittal?
Yeah, it would take some time, but I can do it. I was indicted for some comments that I made in my own home to a supposed journalist who taped it and then sent it out without me having vetted it. So of course, if you sit in your own home and you talk about things that matter, and of course you expect to have the right to see it and a chance to vet it and pick up the things you don't like to have distributed in the public sphere, but I didn't get that. So basically, I was indicted for a few comments I made on the abuse of women and girls in Islam, and was then convicted. No, I was first acquitted in the lower court of Frederiksberg, which is a township in Copenhagen, and then the public prosecutor appealed to Superior Court, where I was convicted, and then my lawyer and I, appealed to the Supreme Court, which you cannot just do. You need a special permission to bring your case in front of the Supreme Court, and we got that permission, and I was then acquitted by a unanimous Supreme Court of 7 justices, led by our Chief Justice. It was a complete acquittal because they had no grounds to stand on. I mean, and the problem is that they knew that. I mean, the prosecutor knew that even before bringing charges against me. Nothing changed. All the witnesses said that they were sorry that they had sent this out without me having seen it and okayed it, so it could not possibly be construed as having been intended for public dissemination. They knew that before bringing the charges. So, if I am to put a verdict on it, I would say it's a victory for the right to speak freely, at least in your own home. Had I lost, we might have lost that right. Mm-hmm. Anyone with a mobile phone comes into your home and tapes you could get you convicted.
So part of the defense was that your comments weren't meant for publication.
That was it, yes.
Yeah, that's why you were acquitted?
That was the only way I could be acquitted.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a concept that's going around in North America, at least. It's called lawfare.
Yeah.
And instead of warfare, what they do is they just sick the lawyers on you and bleed you dry financially and time-wise in the hopes of achieving what the law may not necessarily achieve. And in your case, you didn't break any laws. You were acquitted of the charges against you. And yet, you must now watch your words because you don't want to go through this again, I would imagine.
No, I would not like that. I mean,
but surely there are people out there who would see that, Lars Hedegaard, look what happened to him, even though he was acquitted. The stuff that he had to go through because of words that he said must give others pause. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and I fear that was one of the reasons for this whole trial. They send a message. I mean, I am well educated and hopefully well spoken and can defend myself. But if you cannot do that, if you're out in the backwoods with very few connections and little money, you'd better watch your words because they could come and get you. And I think puts a damp on free speech. It's a frightening thing. Also, you need to defend yourself. You need to get the best lawyer in the country, which I did.
And a lot of people cannot afford.
Well, he did it pro bono.
Oh.
So otherwise I would have been destitute by now. You can imagine what kind of work goes into this. Mm-hmm. I'm in possession of 4 volumes of papers, court papers. I think it was 1,400 pages of nonsense that has been put together. And my lawyers spent, to prepare for the Supreme Court case, 3 whole weeks to do this. And he's the best paid lawyer in the country. So imagine if you're out in Jutland, in a small township there. What are you going to do? You better shut up before you say anything.
Your comments.
This is lawfare.
Yes. Your comments were about Muslims in Denmark, in Copenhagen, I guess.
No, it was a general comment on the treatment of. Mm-hmm. I was asked how come that this guy who interviewed me and who later turned police witness against me. He asked me what did I think. He had a story about some girls that had been raped. I don't know by whom or where. So he said, how does this fit into Islam? And I said, well, it's a common occurrence. We see that all the time in the Muslim culture. I subsequently wrote a book about it called Muhammad's Girls, with even more stuff on it, and to my big surprise, I was not indicted for that. I don't know why, but I'm not going to give them any good ideas now, but I wasn't.
Okay, the Islamic question in Europe. Europe has been sort of a melting pot in a lot of respects, especially recently with the European Union. There's immigration from a lot of different societies. What is it about the Islamic culture, the Islamic mindset that makes it to be the target of comments like yours about the change from the rule of law to exclusion zones where Sharia law is practiced? What is it about the Islamic ideology that precipitates that kind of response from people?
It's very simple. There is a fundamental difference between Muslim immigration and all other kinds of immigration, and the difference is that Muslims are forbidden by their ideology to integrate. So, how can you hope to integrate people that are forbidden to integrate, and if they do integrate, they'll go to hell? This is basically what the Quran and the Hadith and their present leaders tell them. You must not integrate. You cannot integrate. It's against our religion, or whatever you want to call it, ideology. They are encouraged to move into sections of cities to form ghettos, where they can maintain basically the same legal system that they brought from their home countries, their customs, their attire, their sexual norms, etc. And the only difference between them living in a country like Denmark, where we now have about 5 or 6 real ghettos where the police cannot come, the only difference really is that they're better paid in a country like Denmark. They perpetuate their culture, their legal norms and their belief system, and they collect public assistance.
Isn't that perhaps the real reason they're immigrating to the north from places like Turkey and Tunisia?
Yeah, well, in some cases, of course, it would be. There was a survey done in Germany recently, I think, 2009 perhaps it was, that showed that most of the Turkish immigrants had come because they could collect public assistance, and the day they cannot no longer collect public assistance, they'll go back to Turkey.
But surely there has to be a difference between those Muslims who practice Sharia and who cannot integrate, and those Muslims who just simply want to get away from impoverishment in those home countries and make a better life for themselves and become hardworking and not collect the dole.
Yeah, there would be if they had the chance to say what they want. But of course, the first people that are shut up by the power holders of Islam are those Muslims who want to break out of the prison they're in. It's very dangerous for a Muslim to for example, associate with Christians and Jews. We had a parliamentarian in Denmark, Nasakara was his name. He was a Syrian, or he said he was a Palestinian. I kind of like him. He's a likable guy and I think democratically minded. He was elected to parliament. He married a Christian woman and he had a daughter and gave her a Christian name, Sophie. And for that reason, he had to be surrounded by bodyguards at all hours. He was then denounced by one of the leading imams in Denmark as a rat in the hole. A rat in the hole, meaning he could be killed at any time. He was a traitor because he wanted to integrate, he wanted to become a Dane, and his daughter had a Christian name. That is all it takes. So that is also supposed to send a message to anybody else, do not integrate. As a matter of fact, the longer Muslims have stayed in Denmark, the less integrated they've become. The first Muslims that came, the women did not necessarily wear the hijab. Now they all do practically. We know that the imams have patrols walking around in cities like Copenhagen and talking to the heads of families, the man, saying to them, well, how come your women are walking the streets without the hijab? Please see to it that this is corrected.
Well, even in Muslim countries in the 40s and the 50s, when civilization, I should say, started to spread, after the war, even in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the women did not wear the hijab.
No.
Even in Iran, it was a very modern country.
Right.
Dancing in the streets.
Nor did they do that in Egypt.
So what changed? Was it the revival of the Muslim Brotherhood? Would that be the sort of defining moment? When,
I think.
Or is it oil? Oil money?
Both, I think. Two things. The Muslim Brotherhood, of course, gained a foothold in Europe, in Switzerland it was, by the end of the 50s. And they've been building up their strength there. And then it was the oil. As the eminent historian Batya Orr has, you may know her, has described in several of her books, but mostly in the book called Eurabia, there was a compound between the EU and the Arab oil-producing countries from 1973 it was, the struck a bargain. You will continue to sell oil to us. We will then in return allow almost free immigration of your citizens to our countries, and most importantly, we will not attempt to integrate them. They can go on speaking their own native languages, do basically what they do at home, build their mosques, have their Sharia courts eventually. So it's a combination of these two. And of course the Wahhabis, the religious power holders in Saudi Arabia, were became vastly stronger because of all the oil money that's transferred to them.
Mm-hmm. In Brussels in the summer, you said that you blamed the media for the mess that we're in, meaning the breakdown in the rule of law.
Yes.
Did you see, perhaps, your background is as an editor and a journalist, isn't it? Mm. Do you see in journalism, was that a gradual process for their ethical failings, or was there a time when you could point to and say, this punctuates the change in journalism, this is going to change everything? Was it a gradual process, unseen, sort of a Fabian way of changing journalism, or were these punctuations throughout, for example, court cases or journalists coming out and saying a particular thing?
I guess it was a gradual process. I never really, I've never studied that carefully, but by the 1970s, if you talk about my country, and I'm sure it's the same holds true for other countries, journalists were basically left-wing, and they still are today. If journalists were the only ones to vote in national elections in Denmark, the left would have almost all the members of parliament. The others would have just a tiny sliver. They are solidly left-wing, and even far left in many cases. So by the early 80s, and of course when the Berlin Wall fell, it was obvious that the left project of revolutionary socialism, etc., was a lost cause, at least for the moment. So they had to find something else to write about and to be the spokesman for. The working class had left them, betrayed the journalists really. The working class had integrated. So they needed a new revolutionary subject, some downtrodden people that people could feel sorry for. And of course, the Muslims that came to our countries were eminently suited for that role. They could be portrayed as downtrodden and reviled and whatnot. So they became sort of the poster boys and girls of the journalists, and they are that till this day.
Certainly it's not, though, just journalism which has changed society. Are there any particular writers, intellectuals, especially in the arts field? Wouldn't they all go hand in hand, the journalists, the left in the creative arts, the left in the media, the left in intelligentsia, which are all acting in concert to hide the fact that the vast majority of Muslims who are not integrating into Europe are causing a breakdown in the rule of law? Would it be this whole sort of group think that's responsible?
Yeah, it is a question of group think. And the transformation, of course, took place almost simultaneously. By the early 90s in Denmark, you could still see, say, experts, academics with a knowledge of Islam and the Middle East. You could still hear them warn against what they call the fundamentalists or the Islamicists. That changed. I think since around 1995, we haven't heard that from anyone. The fiction is that there's no problem with Islam. Islam is a wonderful, peace-loving religion. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the Muslim Ummah, or those who come to our countries. The only problem is those who speak badly about them. So the problem is people like me. And if I could somehow be removed and people who think like me, our problems would be over.
It may not be a fair question to ask someone who is a journalist and an editor, but his politics. But what did you think, if you could, about Geert Wilders' recent defeat in the elections in the Netherlands, where he lost 11 seats? Does this bode well for people like yourself who want to see, I assume you'd like to see, people stand up against the European Union?
Well, there'll be ups and downs in politics. I haven't studied the results in Holland that well. I've been traveling here in North America for a few days, so I haven't had the time to study it. I don't know the specifics. I do know, though, that the new centre-left government that is supposedly formed in Holland, I think will have the same fate as Monsieur Hollande's government in France. They come in with all kinds of promises to set things right and new social programs and public spending and whatnot, and then after 2 months or so, the whole thing goes down the drain because there's no money for that. So what happens? The only thing they can promise is more immigration, unsustainable immigration of people who will not integrate into society and who will become a burden on the taxpayers. And I think that's going to be crystal clear pretty soon, as it has become already in France, and certainly in my country of Denmark. The first thing, the new government that we've had for about a year, socialist government, the first thing they did was to undo some of the restrictions on immigration that the former government had put into place, although not far from sufficient, but some they did. That was then undone. So now we have a new influx of mostly Somalis, the most unintegratable group of all. And who's going to pay for that? I mean, it is a very costly affair to let tens of thousands of basically unskilled, unemployable analphabets into the country. What are we going to do with them?
Here in the West, we have a number of voices for freedom, if you will, especially in the United States, who has a country a history of individual rights, of integration into a melting pot down there. And in Canada, we have news outlets here who have just recently appeared on the scene, who give voice to people like yourself, who see a cause for concern.
Yeah.
Are there any of those voices in Europe? I don't hear many of the news media there saying what the news media in the United States and Canada are saying about this issue. I don't see any political parties other than Geert Wilders, perhaps.
There are others.
Are there others?
Yeah. Like in Denmark, we have the Danish People's Party, which is a rather strong party with would normally get about 14% of the vote in national elections, and maybe getting a bit more now. There's the Sweden Democrats in Sweden that recently entered parliament, so there are. And also, we have a mainstream press which is very bad. In Denmark, at least, you will from time to time you will see items put up on various incidents, but it's never connected, never put into context what we are really up against. The connections between, say, Muslim gangs shooting it out in the streets, etc., and its possible connection to Islam, that is never put into place. It's never discussed.
I understand that there's now a new newspaper.
There is, yes.
With yourself as co-editor with Ingrid Carlqvist.
Yeah.
Coming out. And could you tell me about that?
Yeah, you want to see it?
I would indeed.
Here's one, a copy. We put out a test issue on the 30th of August. In 3 languages, and also Danish, Swedish, and English, with an online edition in German. We printed these first 3 languages, and we'll see whether or not there is a market for a print newspaper, which is what we prefer to do. We start regular publication on the 3rd of January next year. It'll be a weekly publication. And we hope it'll come out in print. If not in print, it will come out as a fully laid out, fully edited online newspaper. So it's not a blog, it's not a website, it's a newspaper that you will then be able to, it'll pop up like you see it here.
And it's called Dispatch International.
Dispatch International, yes. We had to find a title that is neither Swedish nor Danish nor German nor anything else. So we had to go with the some English name that is somewhat understandable, and the contents will be the same in all editions.
Just translated.
Translated, yes.
Yes. On your banner here, you have a quote from Thomas Jefferson.
Yes, we do.
Freedom of the press cannot be limited without being lost. Funny that you had to go to the United States to find an appropriate quote for free speech.
Well,
we
could have taken George Orwell also. Yes. We thought about that, but I mean, to make it even more international, we went for Thomas Jefferson.
You have a silhouette there of Thomas Jefferson as well.
That's him.
Yes.
We might also have quoted George Orwell's famous phrase, freedom of speech is the freedom to tell people what they don't want to hear. We might have gone for that, but we chose Jefferson.
Very apt. Now, on the front page, on this your example copy, you don't just talk about the Islamic question. You talk about climate change. You talk about Israel.
Oh, yeah.
You talk about Obama. So
We talk about the extreme left, and we talk about Danish economy. We also have articles on culture, etc. The backside article, back page article, is a great piece by Professor Hans Jansen, the preeminent, I would say, expert on Mohammed in Big Trouble, it's called. Mm-hmm. And he is indeed in big trouble because he probably didn't exist. So that is a great piece, and we have articles on Jewish archaeology in the Holy Land, the new face of Christianity, the Vikings.
So it's rather eclectic in its scope.
It is a total newspaper. Mm-hmm. Our intention is not to concentrate on Islam. It's supposed to be an all-round newspaper that will give you a fair idea of what's happening in the world.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say would be the journalistic stance of it? Would it be an objective, or is there a bend to how it's covering the news items of the world?
No, we want the articles to be objective. We do not go in for propaganda or immoderate speech. The tone will be subdued. The real dynamite in this paper will be the issues that we cover and the information that we bring to the public.
Is it that you're trying to cover issues that the mainstream media are neglecting?
That's the whole point here. Mm-hmm. We're trying to, or intend to cover all the news that would be fit to print if the press was worth anything, but they don't. Most of these articles, I would say all of them, in this test issue are brushed under the carpet by the mainstream press. They don't see it as their role to enlighten and inform the public. They treat the public like children. They have to be brought up. They have to mend their ways. They have to be indoctrinated to conform to the way the journalists think. And this is not our approach.
Now that banner headline that you said, all the news that's fit to print, as the New York Times.
Yes.
That's funny you say that, because the word fit seems to be changing day to day, so that now, if it has to do with, for example, the prevalence of rapes in Sweden, that's mm-hmm. not going to get covered because that's not a fit topic to cover, it seems.
Absolutely. We have an item on that in this
maybe paper. You should have said all the news that's fit to print or not fit to print, because it doesn't matter.
Well, right. We have an article here on rapes in Sweden. Immigrants behind 78% of Swedish rapes, on page 2.
And even though that may be a verifiable fact, do you think that this is going to be inflaming to some people?
Yes, I do. But I mean, so be it.
Offending to some people?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because free speech, to be free speech, has to cover offensive speech as well.
It has. I mean, I don't see anything especially offensive in reporting the facts, but...
No, I didn't mean to suggest that it did, but there are some people out there who will take offense at the facts.
And it's not a surprise. I mean, they've had decades of lies and hiding of the truth, so it will be offensive to some people to read the truth. But that's the only way out of this situation we find ourselves in.
Now, you're here in Canada promoting your newspaper and the International Free Press Society, amongst other things, and to speak. And it's not the first time that you've been here and in the United States. Do you see that in North America, perhaps that we could go the way of Europe, the way it is now, with disintegration with Muslims into society? Do you fear for Canada and the United States as much as you do for Denmark and Europe?
Very much. It's a question of time. It's coming already. I mean, you have already ghettos in the US, Dearborn, etc., where that have basically been taken over by Sharia law. And I also fear for free speech in the US, despite the fact that the US has the First Amendment protection. All it takes really is for the US government to sign an international agreement protecting religions from denigration.
Which is now before the United Nations.
Yeah, with the support of Secretary of State Clinton. It's a frightening thing. Because what's going to happen? You sign an international agreement, will that override the American Constitution?
That's a good question.
And who's going to decide?
Well, Lars Hedegaard, I thank you very much for the interview, and I wish you all the best of luck with Dispatch International.
Thank you.